So tonight's talk is basically on your trees in your yard or on your property and what you need to do as far as applications to council, managing your trees, whether it's pruning, removing, and a few other little just general topics of conversation that commonly come up for us as arborists along the way. So hopefully we can address a number of issues. It will be a broad brush rather than any in-depth conversations about particular aspects, but we'll just try and cover the most common ones. So this basically is what we're going to be talking about: the policies and guidelines of council, tree myths, the inner workings of trees, pruning or removing, maintenance, neighbours' trees, and of course the essential tree, which ties in very nicely with Willoughby Council's Tree Festival 2024. Policies and guidelines. So this is a little bit of a complicated topic. But just bear with me because it's, I'll just try and explain as best I can and as simplistically as I can. So the council's, any council's policy is largely following the state environmental planning policies. And there's just been some recent changes in the last couple of years for the SEP, the Biodiversity and Conservation Act. And that's what we're going to basically be looking at tonight. The SEP 19, as you can see down there on your screen, that's for bushland and in urban areas. We're not really going to touch on that because that is a different set of rules altogether. So where do you find this information? Well, it's under the two instruments of the local Willoughby Council Local Environmental Plan and the Willoughby Council Development Control Plan. So the LEP is the actual formal instrument, and the DCP is where council gets the opportunity to tweak some of it. And one of those, as we're talking tonight, is the Part G, the vegetation management. So that little graph there is just to sort of show you where it sits and all the other management tools that council have to fit in, that feeds into that vegetation management. So there's a guideline, there's a natural heritage register, there's a street tree master plan, urban tree management, and of course the bushland management. So where to find the application or any additional information for trees that you will need to read and kind of understand. And that is on the Willoughby Council's, when you first open up the www.willoughbycouncil.com, it'll be under the search engine, just type in trees. Now, as I've just been informed, it won't look like this as the web page has only just very recently in the last couple of hours been updated. But just in the search, if you put trees and vegetation, you will link into where you're supposed to be. And following the red arrow down to where it says trees, all the information there, you click on that, and then various screens will then open up, whether it's an application you need or whether it's to actually read anything to do with the master plan or what you've got to do in the lodgement of your application. So the Willoughby Council Development Control Plan, Part G, Vegetation Management, it steps through quite nicely about the permits, whether you need a permit, whether you need a DA requirement, what the exemptions are, pruning controls, and just general tree guidelines. We will actually cover this following, but just know that it's under the DCP, Part G, Vegetation Management, of where you need to go to find this information. Tree myths. There are many and plenty of tree myths. So we've just sort of highlighted a few, and I'll add a few to it. So, do trees cause foundational problems? The short answer is yes, they can, and generally, no, they don't. If you talk to an engineer, they will say they always cause problems, but we haven't, as arborists, we tend not to agree with that. It also is very, very dependent on the tree species, the type of foundation that your house is built on, the subsoil, whether you're built on a sandstone or whether you're on a clay lens, clay soils and clay lenses. And also the biology of the tree. So, are they typically trees that have really big roots, or are they trees that just generally, don't get too big? Yeah. So it just depends. The engineers, as I said, have always said about removing trees that are close to your house. But what we find too as arborists, and this is nothing away from the engineers, of course, but what we find is that the trees that generally are growing close to your house or foundations, generally the roots don't cause, and in fact, they absolutely assist with the reduction of moisture, soil moisture beneath the property. So that can really help with mold, and also helps with the drying out of soils. The other thing too that also happens with tree roots is if you build a house, that generally the tree roots are so small, they're the size of your hair, and these small ephemeral roots just do not have the strength to push foundations over. Where the problem happens is when the tree root does expand and it has this ability to sort of jack up the house. That really is the only time that these tree roots will cause significant problems. Okay, so enough on that. So trees swaying, that the tree is about to fall over. Absolutely not. Trees have to move. They have to, and they do that to dampen energy. Now, when I talk about energy, that's from the wind blowing on the trees, and that big canopy sail area has to dissipate that energy. So what happens is that as we get to the end of the branches, as everyone knows, those branches get smaller and smaller and smaller, that they taper to a small point. That allows them the flexibility to swing and sway in the breeze. When you look at a tree such as a eucalypt in a fairly heavy blow situation, the leaves actually become quite horizontal, which then allows that energy of the wind to move through the canopy. And that is, again, a situation where the tree doesn't really cop the brunt of that energy force. So trees have to sway, the energy gets transported down the trunk and into the tree roots. But by the time it gets to the lower trunk and into the tree root plate, it's imperceptible for us to sort of see this movement, but it does happen. Okay, trees have a cavity, therefore are structurally unsound. No, again, no, but it will depend. So if we have obviously a very, very large cavity in a tree, and we need to have that assessed, basically. But again, it will be dependent on the tree species. It'll be dependent on where that cavity is occurring within the tree. And it may not necessarily be structurally unsound. What we do find is a lot of trees, particularly our old trees with very large trunk diameters, often we will find, and we can't see it because we don't have that X-ray vision, but a lot of the times they will have the internal column of that tree may be hollowed out. It's just a normal biological, physiological process that happens. And other times it's not, it's just solid wood the way through. We as arborists, we then assess the degree of hollowness or how big the cavity is, and particularly if we can see the cavity. So just because a tree has a cavity, it does not necessarily make it the tree structurally unsound. It's part of that assessment and diagnostic process that we go through in having a look at the tree and the overall health and function of that particular tree. It's also very important to understand that if a tree does have a cavity, for example, we also look at then the broader picture. We have a look at how it is, its exposure, or it's rather protected. So a tree might be sitting, for example, on the top of a crest, so it's very exposed, or the tree might be down in a gully where there's lots of other trees around, and we would consider that tree to be quite environmentally protected. Every big tree is going to fall over in a storm. Well, if that were the case, we wouldn't have any trees standing. Trees are designed to keep standing up. Trees also have an inherent strength within them, and usually from the people who have done research on this, they say that the inherent strength of trees sort of averages somewhere between the 4.5. So for every, it's 4.5 times strong to withstand all these wind duration storms. Yeah, so they're very, very unlikely to fall over. What does happen in the urban environment is we have to be very protective of our trees, and that's not to trench through any roots, because the root system is designed for structural integrity, for structural stability, as well as the feeding mechanism of the tree, so the uptake of nutrient and moisture from the soil environment. So, and also the root system is a large area for storage of excess carbohydrate that the leaves through photosynthesis has produced. And a tree needs to be kept well and healthy in order for those budgets, well, let's call them budgets, so these energy budgets of carbohydrate storage exceeds what the tree needs at that particular point in time, in order to kickstart things like when it's coming out of winter dormancy, before it starts flowering and producing fruits. If the tree might, for example, get damaged in the future, it needs this excess storage of these carbohydrate nutrients in order to help repair itself, to flower, and to keep all the functions happening within the tree. So number 5, during high winds, there'll be less damage to my property if I have less trees around. Well, this is a little bit contentious, because what I find is the more trees that you have around, the less intense the wind is at ground level. So we've all seen the wind socks of the wind coming up over the tops of the canopies, and then it dissipates off out into the future. So there's 2 answers to this question. It would depend on the quality of the trees that are around the property or on the windward side. And it also depends on the type of tree that comes. So some trees are inherently stronger than other trees. And what we find is yeah, a well-maintained tree, a tree that hasn't had too much pruning done to it, and a tree that really hasn't had too many roots cut. And that's a very hard thing to talk about because we all do development. We all want to put swimming pools in. We all want to, change the level of for landscaping. So it's all about keeping the tree as healthy and as robust as we possibly can. Tree roots from the closest tree has damaged my pipes. Large parts of the Chatswood area is built using clay pipes. Now, clay pipes have a lifespan really of about the 40 to 60 year time frame. And as everybody knows, they become brittle with age. The rubber ring that joins where the collar joins on, the linkage joins on, that perishes over time. The pipes fracture if there's slight ground movement, which does happen, or through development, the pipes can crack. Now, when the pipe does crack, it's usually not a direct result from tree or trees. Trees haven't come across and gone, right, there's a pipe, let's go into it. But when there's a crack or a breach in that pipe, the pipe leaks. And if you think about a stormwater pipe or a sewer pipe, whatever pipe may be, it's full of nutrients, and it's really, really easy for the tree then. The tree roots don't have to go terribly far to make up that necessary moisture requirement that they have. The pipe's there, the pipe's providing that for it. But what the little fine hairs of the tree roots do is they will get into that crack, because it's easy for the tree roots then to start taking up this moisture and nutrient, and then the tree root will then multiply. So it just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies, and it's just easy. It's just like being let loose in a supermarket where there's just abundance of food and it just has a great old time. So that's what happens with pipes. The closest pipe damages, no, not necessarily, because when you talk about the tree structure, which we will get to in the next couple of slides, we have what we call the structural roots, which are immediately from the trunk. And then, as I said before, they taper finer and finer and finer. So the pipes closest, the tree roots closest to the pipe may not be capable of actually entering the pipe. We find this time and time again when the plumber comes, because there's a pipe blockage. The plumber says you've got tree roots in your pipe. When it's that tree there, and they always point to the closest. Well, my son's a plumber, and I sort of understand where he's coming from, and understand quite well. But it is just not the case. It's just the way the tree, the physiology of the tree's development and its root development. It may not be that tree. It could be from the grass. It could be from the shrubs. It could be from, for example, the viburnum hedges that we so have. Like, yeah, it can come from anywhere. A tree root or a root from a plant has the same requirement of moisture and nutrient. It's just not. So, yes, so plumbers are always quick to say it's from the tree roots. The inner workings of trees. So inner workings of tree. Swaying. Yes, we've talked about that. A tree has to sway in order for it to stay upright. Leaf dropping. As part of canopy dynamics, there is a renewal process of old leaves fall and new ones are produced. This is ever so evident in deciduous trees rather than the evergreen trees like your angophras, your eucalypts, your on turpentines, all of those trees, they will just drop. All trees drop. It doesn't matter what you've got, you will have leaf drop, flower drop, fruit drop. It is just the way it goes. Branch dropping. Branch dropping is an interesting one. We as arborists, we think that, it's well known that deadwood will drop. Now, deadwood, it's species specific. So the tree that you're looking at is an Angophora, and the lowest branch facing you, which is black, is a dead branch. Some trees, like your Angophoras, really hang on to their deadwood for some reason, whereas other trees, such as your lemon-scented gums, they naturally prune. But the good part about the naturally pruning bit is usually the branches are very small when they drop. They tend not to drop large branches. So that's just your dead wood. Remember too that the dead wood, the tissues at a cellular level are dry, so they've lost that flexibility. So more likely dead wood is going to fall during windy occasions rather than a still dry occasion. Branch dropping when there's live branches, that's a little bit more concerning, whether a tree has developed a propensity to drop live branches. Eucalypts in particular, not Angophoras, but eucalypts have a very sensitive crown dynamic insofar as when they grow taller and there's more shading to the lower limbs, there is a potential, and I stress potential, it's not the given, that they will start dropping branches. Also, when we have an extreme weather event, sometimes the branches are damaged internally. We can't see it, we can't predict it, but then at a time those branches will drop simply because they've been damaged mechanically. They talk about summered branch drop, which it's a long, hot topic, which I really won't get into terribly much. But the theory behind that is that the internal structure of the branch tends to dry out at different rates and ratios, and then that affects the cell strength at the point of breakage. Sap. Usually sap is a very good sign insofar as talking about the tree budgets of photosynthesis and the storage of starch. When there's a lot of sap, it usually means that there's been some form of damage done to the tree. So it could be a result of pruning, it could be a result of insect attack, it could be a pathogen attack. Normally with sap is a protectant and a protective mechanism for trees. So it actually engulfs the insect or try and localizes and just causes immobility with that insect. So when a tree has been damaged and there's not a lot of sap coming out of the tree, caution approaches, because sometimes that could kind of signal that the tree doesn't have these stored starches in them. Hollows are very normal for old trees. So when I talk about an old tree, I'm talking about a tree that's in excess of 100 to 150 years old. So what happens is these old trees are highly, highly valuable trees for the environment. So that's when the opportunity for hollows begins, and we have nesting opportunities for birds and mammals alike. So just because a tree has a hollow in it doesn't necessarily make mean that the tree is unsound. And if you are fortunate enough to have an old tree with a hollow, I encourage you to sit and watch and just take note of the activity that's going on in that hollow. Sometimes the hollows are multi-used. So, for example, you might have possums coming into it, you might have lizards coming into it, and then at a different time of year, you might have birds coming into it. So these hollows are multi-used. They're becoming less and less common, but super, super important.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Margot. Just letting you know we've got about half an hour left. So if we could get to mainly the pruning and maintenance, that would be
lovely,
great.
lovely. So just quickly, how do trees grow? There's three components. There's roots, trunk, and canopy. And this is not a particularly good diagrammatic representation of it, but a good tree, all of these three areas will be in equilibrium with each other, meaning that the root system won't be overextending. It will feed and function the canopy. Likewise, the canopy size and density will be supported by the trunk. So they're just quite wonderful trees. Yeah, trees are long-lived. I think we in Australia have very long-lived trees. They do require proper care, nutrients to stay healthy. And we need to look after our trees. We need to factor in the trees. So part of the maintenance is gutter cleaning, is sweeping up the leaves. There might be a little bit of fruit drop at certain times of the year, but just embrace that seasonality change of these trees. But they do provide us with enormous benefits. They're just beautiful to watch them, the seasonality change, what's going on with the trees, summer shade, winter sunlight, or just the cooling effect of it. They are a huge investment, and I believe that they will become more and more important the larger the tree on your property as climate change and people just want to have these trees. So an arborist, my goodness, what does arborist do? Well, we are trained in trees, tree management. We have a look at the structural integrity of trees. We have a look at their health. Our job ranges from certifying a tree's alive and well to a tree that's dead. We help with planners. We write lots of reports on how to mitigate damage. If we can tweak designs, we do risk assessments on trees, and so it goes on. I belong to the Institute of Australian Consulting Arborists, and part of that is we do not cut trees. It is actually seen as a conflict of interest, so we do not cut trees. There are some level 5 and higher arborists that do that, but they currently are not permitted to be members of our group. Why engage an arborist? Oh, here we go. Or first and foremost, when you lodge an application to council for pruning or removal, that is it. Council will not come out and give you advice on your tree, on your development, or they don't have the time. They have the capacity, but they do not have the time, and that is not their function. So somebody like me, who is a consulting arborist, we come out, we will make an assessment on your tree. We will come to talk about pruning. We'll come talk about deadwood. We'll talk about root plate. We'll talk about various strategies on your pipe, give you advice of where to go if more information, more investigative information is required. And some of those things can be things like resistor graphing, which is to determine how hollow the tree is, a pica sonic testing. We can advise you on roots if you need to have a root identified to send that off, soil and poisoning samples, aerial investigations by the use of either putting someone up the tree, which we're tending not to do quite as much these days, but a lot of it's done through drone work. And as I said, we've done lots of reports. Tree risk assessment, land and environment court is also another big part of what we do. How to select an arborist. Well, here we go. I belong to the top one, the iaca.org.au. We're the ones that do not cut trees, whereas Boroculture Australia, yes, there's some fine arborists that work for there. A lot of them do cut trees. So there's a hierarchy of arborists. So we, the top one, are the level 5s or higher, level 8s, and we provide these reports for council, etc., whereas the level 3 arborists, they're the ones that get up into the trees to do all your maintenance work on trees. Some of them are very good at knowing what they're doing. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great, because pruning, once you start pruning and you prune incorrectly, you can't put it back. Pruning or removing trees. Here we go. So under the Willoughby Council's prescribed tree, this is what a tree needs to do. It has to be greater than 4 meters in height. Or it has to have a crown spread greater than 3 meters, or it has to have a trunk circumference greater than 60 centimeters measured at 1.4 meters above the ground. If your tree covers any one of those measurements, height measurements or dimensions, the tree is protected. So you could have a tree that is less than 4 meters in height, but if it has a trunk circumference greater than 60 centimeters, it's protected. So pruning, the council's permission is a 10% of the tree's canopy within 5 years. The reason for that simply is because pruning wounds trees. We don't want to wound our tree. So that's where it is. And older trees take a lot longer to recover than younger trees do. So it's basically for the tree health point of view, which is why that it's over a 5 year. They're saying if a tree is visually prominent from the street or surrounding properties, that's council has defined that, or if it's in a wildlife corridor. And this is what the permit looks like. And if you go on to just Google trees in the search engine on council's homepage, you will come here to this, and it tells you what your fees are, and there's a whole list of check boxes and a little diagram that you must draw in order for the tree officer to understand where that tree is in relation to it. Many a time I'd been out there and there'd be 4 or 5 trees in close vicinity without any of this being filled in, and it's impossible to determine which tree it is, in which case the application gets refused. So the permit, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Display 72 hours prior to the work commencing and keep it there. And this is just to let your neighbours know that if there's any tree work in progress, you have permission to carry this out. It saves a whole lot of problems for council and for the homeowner. What trees are exempt? There's about 30 trees listed on council's website as being exempt, and you can find that under that Part G, vegetation management. It is important that you have your tree identified, that it actually is on the exempt species list. Now, I appreciate that a lot of you would not really know if the tree was on the exempt species list. But again, take a photo of the tree. If you're not sure, send it into council. Just ask council to have a look. Just don't get fined. If you're in a designated bushfire, what trees are exempt? Follow the requirements of, You must check the website on the day that the tree is to be removed, as the 1050 website can often change. So what might be a zoning that gives you clearing permission last week may not be this week. And also it is very, the removal entitlement within the Willoughby Council area is very, very slight. So you need to check this prior to, otherwise things can go very wrong. So how much can I prune without a permit? Well, 10% over a 5-year. You can remove dead wood with a caveat with that. Make sure that the dead wood doesn't have a hollow in it, and it may have an insect such as your microbats or something else living in that hollow. Very important just to check. And again, as I've said, 10% of the individual tree crown over a 5-year period. What I'd also like to say at this point in time is, before you prune any tree, identify why you want to prune the tree. If your answer is because it's a tree, it needs pruning, it's not good enough. You need to actually undertake the pruning because of a legitimate reason. So it's growing into the power lines, it's hitting the side of the building, the tree branch is has got some sort of scarring on it. Whatever it happens to be, you need to clearly identify why you need to prune it. Every pruning cut will damage the tree, will expose it to ongoing pathogens, and generally the trees don't need to be pruned anyway. There is an Australian standard, as you can see, 4373, and that standard is a great standard for the pruning. When do you need a DA? Well, usually you need a DA when you're going to do a development. And this goes, there is a Natural Heritage Register for Willoughby Council, which is a fabulous document. If the tree is listed as a heritage item, or the tree is listed on a property that is listed as a heritage item, it's in a heritage conservation area. And then when you're proposing to do development, so, alts and adds, a pool, whatever the development might be. And it's usually trees within 5 meters of that development, irrespective of your property boundary. So the consulting arborist would come in with the supplied survey, plus the architecturals, plus the drainage diagrams. We would have a look at things like soil changing, and we would pick up trees on your neighbouring property if they were within this 5 meters of that development. It includes driveways, street trees, but that's usually taken, is usually run by council when it comes to a street tree. However, the consulting arborist usually picks that up as well. Don't get a fine. They're pretty hefty. So $3,000 for a homeowner and $6,000 for a business. And also, there is a replacement ratio within Willoughby Council of, for every one tree that you remove, a prescribed tree, it is you will need to plant 3 other trees in its place. Yes, and there's an offset fee for planting. Tree maintenance. Pruning, we've just said the standard there. Undertake deadwooding. Don't damage your trees through whippersnipper damage or crashing into trees with wheelbarrows, cars, trucks, bikes, whatever. Don't carve your name into trees. All of these things which can actually damage the tree, because they take a long time to repair if they do, and if pathogens get into the tree, it could mean the death of the tree down the track. or you know, or an added expense that you didn't realize was going to manifest itself in the future. So soil around tree bases, don't increase it, don't decrease it, don't compact it. Trees are very, very sensitive to where the tree roots are in the soil profile, as far as the oxygenation in that upper area. So when you bury tree roots, they tend, or compact the soil, that oxygen supply decreases within the soil, and it's required for natural cell respiration. So your tree in due course will start looking very, very poor. Do you need to prune? Well, there's different types of pruning. You can thin the crown, you can crown lift, you can do crown reduction. They're all types of pruning, and they're covered in the standard. Neighbours trees. Oh, this is a classic. Can I cut my neighbour's tree that overhangs my property? Well, this is a clear example of this picture of what not to do, because it severely damages the tree. And again, ask yourself, why on earth would you need to prune a tree like that, particularly with a small canopy? If you do need to, contact the tree owner, have a conversation with them, be very, very clear as to why you want to prune the tree, or why you need to prune the tree. Don't prune it like this to cause canopy imbalance. It just looks really ugly, and it's not going to do you or your neighbours any favour in the relationship stakes. You will not recover. The tree won't recover, nor will you. Yes, and if you're required to prune more than 10%, you will actually need to put an application in, which your neighbour or the tree owner needs to sign that form. Without that signature, council do not get involved. My neighbour's trees are impacting my property, fence, pathways. Well, how bad's the damage? So what? You know, so what? Like, if a tree is pressing up against a timber fence, who cares? You know, we can cut the palings down. We can give the tree a little bit more space. How bad is the pathway being lifted? Is there anything we can do to actually raise the rest of the path up so it's not a trip hazard? There's so many things that we can do that are minor things in order to help and retain both the tree and good relationships with our next door neighbour. Have a think about what it is, what's upsetting you. You know, whole tree removal for something that's very, very minor is not really is not going to be looked favourable upon, particularly by the council tree assessment officer. Pipes, we've talked about that. Fences, yeah. Trees that are overhanging, or canopy that's overhanging your roof, generally to prune that back is just generally granted, but again, it depends on the volume of canopy that requires being pruned back, and so forth. You don't need to have trees pruned because it's dropping debris, fruit, flowers, etc., etc. Please just be mindful, get a broom, get your blower. It's quite easy to sweep them up. And usually it's a seasonal thing. It does not happen all year round. It's just a seasonality and what the tree does during that time. And the essential tree. So before you actually, if you're adverse to trees at all, please do a property inspection before you actually buy the property. Go and have a look at the trees. So often people will come in and they'll buy the property and they'll go, I didn't realize there were so many trees in the backyard, or there were so many of my neighbor's trees overhanging. As much as you pay attention to the actual property inside and what it has to offer, also make sure that, you know, if you're not one for trees, make sure that what you see is what you get. Don't move into a property that has 3, 4, 5 beautiful trees around it and just expect everybody to prune the overhang, or you will get permission to remove those trees. Just don't do it. Yeah, we need to live with our trees. We need to support them. We need to encourage more growth. We just need to encourage more. And finally, there is such a great range of trees out there that are produced by nurseries. Various nurseries will specialize in certain trees, other nurseries will have others. So just don't go to Bunnings and buy a tree because it's so easy and convenient for you. Really stop to think about, what is it that I need in a tree? Is it summer shade, winter sun? A tall tree is not a dangerous tree. A tall tree is a majestic tree. A tall tree provides so much interest, so much environmental benefit. They are really quite lovely. But be very mindful of where you plant that tree on your property. So if, for example, don't plant it on the fence line because half of that canopy is going to overhang your neighbour's property. Plant it more in the middle of your property, but not near a pipe, not near electricity wires, not really near the house, so that as that tree develops, and when you do buy a tree and you finally settled on that, research what the mature size and canopy spread is going to be, and then bring it back a notch, all three, because usually the trees that we plant in our domestic situation do not get as big as what the stated on the label does, that they're quasi bonsai. And pick a tree that's going to be long lived, and it's going to provide some beautiful opportunities for your property, and it softens it. It's not, your property is not so stark. It's yeah, they're just great things, and they're seriously great. And finally, the last one is the state government for New South Wales. I can only speak for New South Wales, has a target. And Willoughby Council's target is basically to reach a 40%. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but believe you me, it is a lot. There's a lot of trees that need to go into people's properties. And the target is set by the state government. And the greatest loss of trees that we have in any LGA across Sydney in particular, and probably across Australia, is within private property. It's terrible to see the demise of our canopy population across any LGA. And I think if you're going to plant a tree in it, embrace the tree, really revere this awesome structure that you have that's growing year on year, and the intrigue and the benefit that it does bring to you and the local community, whether it's your neighbours enjoying the flowers on it, or whether it's you embracing the life that the tree provides, such as your insects, such as your bees, and your possums and your birds that come and visit these trees. So really revere your trees. They are not dangerous. They're not designed to harm us in any way. And yeah, that's kind of me having a very brief overview of what we do. So Rowena, have you got any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's amazing you managed to cover so many different topics with such a short period of time. I just wanted to clarify one thing. I think when you were talking about the list of trees exempt from needing a permit when it comes to pruning, and you mentioned that residents can ask council to confirm a tree species. I think I just want to clarify that in that case, residents need to get advice from a qualified arborist or tree specialist, whereas council, I don't think council has the capacity to go out and identify the tree.
Good point, Rowena. Thanks for that. Yes, so what you can do is take a photograph of the tree and maybe get a leaf sample, and maybe if there's any fruit on the ground, such as little capsules, and take it to your local nursery and ask them. And if they're umming and ahhing about, or they think it might be this, or they think it could be that, there's other places you can go, such as the Botanic Gardens, or you might go to a different nursery. And go to a nursery, I'm not talking about the Bunnings, sorry, Bunnings, I'm not giving you a bad rap, but take it to a nursery or somebody who is qualified to identify what that tree is, so that you know full well. You can quite easily call an arborist up, but they're just a few ideas for you as to where to go to get those trees identified, because there are a number of trees on that exempt species list from council. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's very clear. Thank you. We've got maybe about 2 minutes. I've got some questions here that I think people might like to hear. One of them is, what do I do if I think I see someone removing trees illegally?
Good question. The best thing to do is actually phone council. So just on their inquiry line, the general one, inform the person who answers the telephone, and they, I believe, will at the back end, they will inform whether or not that property has a permit to remove the tree. And if it is, I'm sure they will let you know. Otherwise, if there's no permit there, and you're suspicious that some foul play is going on, the council will probably inform the compliance team to come down and just make sure that everything is bona fide.
Mm-hmm. And this question relates to termites. What if I'm worried about termites coming from a tree nearby?
Whoa, big topic, big subject. It is best to have your termites identified, because there are many different types of termites that we get in trees, which are not, and I repeat, not harmful to your property. Everybody should be having an annual termite inspection, irrespective of whether there's any trees close by or not. It's part of the environment of living within Australia. Also, what I've come across in my times is the termite species within the tree that you're aware of is not necessarily the same species that may be attacking your house. So it is very, very important to have that termite species, whether it's in the tree, whether it's in the house, or there's two different species, to have them identified.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm sorry that's all the time we have tonight, but you've done a great job, Margot, covering so many topics. So thank you so much. And everyone, as you can see, managing trees on your property does come with a lot of considerations, but when it's done properly, it does provide a lot of great benefits. So if you have any questions or concerns relating to trees on your property, it's best to consult with a qualified arborist, as individual cases can vary significantly. So as I mentioned before, a recording of this session will be made available, and so we'll be sending that out quite shortly. And so I do hope you guys found the session informative and useful, and do check out our program for the Tree Festival, which will run for the next 3 weeks. Thanks again for joining tonight, and I hope you all have a great night. Thank you. Thanks, Margot.
Thank you very much, Rowena. Thank you all for joining.
Thanks. Bye.